Good afternoon. This is Minister Shakna Kuti Ben Israel with Ye Shall Know the Truth Ministries broadcast. Today's segment will be on Black political prisoners, the revolving door of incarceration. First, I'm going to give a brief historical background of Black incarceration in America. The incarceration of blacks in America can be traced back to the slave patrols of the 1700s, which continued all the way up until the 13th Amendment at the end of the Civil War. Black codes regulated black state laws. Until 1868, with the ratification of the 14th Amendment, supposed equal protection abolished black codes, but still allowed for Jim Crow laws, which segregated blacks into inferior economic, social, and educational status. Some 1,025 people were shot and killed by police last year. 235 blacks were killed by police in 2019. At the end of 2017, 475,900 blacks were incarcerated, some 33% of the incarcerated population, while we are only 13% of the U.S. population. This happened about the same time of the privatization of prisons. Bill Clinton introduced a three strikes bill, which privatized prisons. Prison became big industry in America. Prisons make over $30-some thousand for every inmate they incarcerate. They have contracts with big industrial companies like Lockheed Martin, Bell Computers, Internet Services, even lingerie. Now, it so happened that I did a study a few years back and found out that the same congressmen that voted for the private prisons also have stock in the largest private prison, which is the Crime Corporation of America, which makes millions of dollars a year in profits. Some well-known political prisoners include Mumia Abu-Jamal, who was accused of killing the Philadelphia police officer and has spent over 40 years, almost 40 years in prison since 1981. Assata Shakur, who back in the 1960s was accused of killing a cop who was attacking her and a friend of hers, she escaped prison and went to Cuba, and Fidel Castro refused to give her up. Now she have over $1 million bounty on her head, Assata Shakur. And Jamal El-Amin, who used to be Ace Rap Brown, who was accused of killing a cop who came to his house to kill him. And even though they have an eyewitness in that case who identified somebody else, and also they said that the assailant was shot, and when they caught Jamal in Alabama, he was not shot. This happened in Atlanta. But he's been sitting in prison since since 2005 or 6. We're going to be doing detailed stories on all three of these cases for future broadcasts, which we'll be letting you know. Now, in recent decades, black women's incarceration has grown at twice the rate as black men's. A staggering number of these women are in prison without charges or trial. More than 6% of these black women in jails under local control have not been convicted of a crime and are awaiting trial. State and federal agencies pay local jails to house an additional 12,500 women. ICE, which is the immigration cops, and the U.S. Marshals contract local jails to hold roughly 5,000 women in 2019, most of them black and Hispanic. Pre-trial detention has been the rule of the day. Many cannot afford bail even when bail is given. Many of these women are primary caretakers of children, oftentimes which they had in prison with inadequate medical care. These children end up in foster care and end up becoming a subject of medical experiments, as was the case in New York. There's a good documentary on that called Guinea Pig Kids, where they took kids from mothers who had AIDS and gave them 5 times the adult doses of AIDS drugs. This is in the 1980s, and many of these children died in these experiments. Some 80% of women incarcerated are mothers. Women in prison are twice as likely to suffer mental and psychological breakdown as well as physical abuse. And as with the men, poor diets in prison lead to degenerative diseases like diabetes, high blood pressure, and obesity. In a recent study entitled Mass Incarceration Targets Girls, Black girls make up 35% of girls incarcerated, while in prison, many convert to lesbian and bisexual activity. Probation often leads to a revolving door of incarceration. Probation fees, lack of women halfway houses, homelessness leads many women back to prison and labeled repeat offenders, not because they have committed a crime, but because they have run afoul of a burdensome obligation of release and probation. Okay, that's a little background to our segment today. This afternoon, we're going to be discussing one particular case of a young lady who we believe was targeted not because she had committed any crime, but because she was into health foods and natural herbs and actually promoting it for, for a while, and had her own products and company. And you know the pharmaceuticals don't like, the industry don't like that. And so she was arrested and charged, like Dr. Sabi had been arrested and charged in the 1980s. But in her case, involved a sick daughter who was sick at birth, and unfortunately, the young girl died, and they charged the mother with murdering her own daughter, which we know she's innocent of, and we're gonna discuss that a little more in a minute. But I have here with me Brother Akbar, Brother Sultan Akbar, who was the father of this accused woman. And he knows in some detail the nature of her case. And so we're going to be discussing some of her case with Brother Sultan Akbar. So